My name is Tiffany Schultz. I'm a Triad Conference Committee member and a regional director for the Better Business Bureau serving Wisconsin. A few housekeeping items before I introduce our first speaker. If you have a question during today's presentation, please use the Q&A box. I will monitor the box and will bring the questions to our presenters' attention either during or near the end of the session. Additionally, if you're planning on submitting for continuing education hours, attendance certificates will be emailed 1 to 2 weeks after the conference ends. You can expect these by mid-November. Finally, we will email all participants a survey after the conference series ends in late October. We hope you will take a few minutes to share feedback and suggestions for next year. Our first speakers today will join us from the Federal Trade Commission. I'd like to introduce you to Christine Carson and Matthew Schultz. Christine is a paralegal specialist and recently joined the Federal Trade Commission Midwest Regional Office in Chicago, Illinois in February. Prior to coming on board with the FTC, Chris spent 13 years as a criminal paralegal legal assistant with the United States Attorney's Office, Northern District of Indiana, South Bend Division, where she was a member of the Elder Justice Team, assisting with prosecutions involving fraud of our elderly. Chris is a graduate of Purdue University with a BS in Kinesiology and Master's work in Exercise and Aging. She has her paralegal certificate from Indiana University. Our next speaker is Matthew Schultz. He's an attorney at the Federal Trade Commission Midwest Regional Office in Chicago, Illinois, where he investigates potentially deceptive and unfair business practices and litigates enforcement actions regarding consumer protection laws. Before joining the FTC, Matt was an assistant attorney general in the Consumer Fraud Bureau at the Office of the Illinois Attorney General and spent several years in private practice as an associate and partner at a Chicago-based law firm. Matt is a graduate of Grinnell College and Northwestern Pritzker School of Law. Matt, Christine, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Tiffany. Welcome, everyone. We're really happy to be here. Thank you for joining us. As Tiffany mentioned, Chris and I work out of the Midwest Regional Office at the FTC that's based in Chicago. Our office in Chicago is one of 8 regional offices of the Federal Trade Commission. And we cover 11 states, all the way from Kentucky to the Dakotas, including Wisconsin. We are here to share information and listen to what you may have to share and hopefully answer any questions you may have today. But we always like to say at the start that we only speak for ourselves, Matt and Chris, and not the FTC or our commissioners. So Chris, I don't know if you wouldn't mind please sharing your screen so we can get the slides started. We're here today to talk about identity theft, and unfortunately, we probably all have some familiarity with the subject. Hopefully, we can provide some helpful information about how to spot particular scams and what to do if, unfortunately, you find that your identity has been stolen or a contact or someone you are working with identity has been stolen. Briefly, as I think many of you know, identity theft happens when a thief uses someone's personal information or financial information without their permission. That means that a thief could be illegally borrowing money, filing taxes to try to get a return, getting credit in someone else's name. The consequences of the identity theft can be very, very serious, including financial loss, reputational damage, and emotional and psychological harm. To address this issue, the Federal Trade Commission, which we like to think of and call ourselves the nation's consumer protection agency, we've created resources to empower people to spot, avoid, and report identity theft. Before we talk about those resources, we'd like to share a little bit about what scams people use to try to take people's personal information and give you a little bit of a sense of the problem in the United States. Chris, can you go to the next slide, please?
Yep, you bet.
So this first slide unfortunately captures the scope of the problem. People report identity theft to the FTC, and we collect those reports. In 2021, we received around 1.4 million identity theft reports, which is about what we saw in 2020. We've already received over 600,000 identity theft complaint reports in 2022. So it seems like we're on pace to be roughly the same in 2022. We also recognize that only a fraction of the people who unfortunately experience identity theft report that. So the takeaway here is that identity theft is a really, really serious problem, widespread throughout the United States. Next slide, please, Chris. This slide shows an interesting picture when you look at identity theft reports by age. The chart shows that identity theft is unfortunately universal, but also affects age groups differently. There's often a focus on older adults as the targets of fraud and identity theft, but if you look at the reports that the FTC gets here, you can see that people of all ages are affected, not just older adults. Take a look, for example, at the bars at the top of the screen showing 30 and 39-year-olds. As you can see, we get a tremendous amount of reports of identity theft from those categories. Also, just as an additional note, if you're interested in looking at data like this and sort of looking geographically or, sort of manipulating the data and looking at it in different ways, I would encourage all of you to visit ftc.gov/explore data. And from there, you can find your way to Tableau Public, which has consumer complaints that we collect in our database. Consumer Sentinel broken out in a lot of different ways. And it can be very useful if you are passing along information about identity theft to contacts, to review that information. And I think it's really useful. Okay, Chris, can we go to the next slide, please? On this slide, I'd encourage you to take a look at the bars that are highlighted closer to the bottom of the slide. On the left side, you can see the sort of median, you can see the median loss. And what you see here, the picture this slide presents, is that the older adults continue to report a higher individual median dollar loss than younger adults. So while we saw in the previous slide that identity theft affects everyone, what we see as we drill down by dollar loss is that older adults report higher median dollar losses when they experience identity theft than younger adults, which is why it's really important to highlight the issue and why we're happy to be here today. Okay, Chris, how about next slide, please? So as I said at the start, we thought it would be helpful at the beginning. Some of this may be very familiar to you, unfortunately, but we thought it would be very helpful to orient people and to cover some common scams because some of them might not be familiar to you, and the more we get the word out about common scams to people, the more they can get the word out to contacts, associates, colleagues. And so hopefully some of this information is useful to you all. Scammers take, people's money or personal information or both. And we want to encourage you to think about ways that people might use things like government imposter scams, which are flagged on this slide, to do both take people's information and their money. Imposter scams have remained the most important or the most common type of fraud for every age group for many years now. In 2021, we received almost 1 million reports about imposter scammers, fake government agents, pretend grandkids, bogus sweethearts, and others who took a reported nearly $2.3 billion from people across the country. So this is a really, really serious problem and really important for us to spend some time thinking about. I bet almost everyone who's listening right now has received an IRS, a Social Security Administration, or a Medicare imposter scam call, unfortunately. As many of you know, I'm sure that's when someone calls pretending to be with the government agency. Maybe they call, maybe they text, maybe they send an instant message and they demand personal information from you. They might give you your employee ID or their employee ID number to sound sort of more official. Often they have some information about the person that they contact, whether it be an address or a telephone number, obviously, if they're calling, or both, or a full name, and they use that to seem credible. And then often they threaten people. They suggest that they might go to jail, or they will suffer some other consequences if they don't pay right away. You know, one of the things that we like to highlight with these sorts of calls is that the first reaction that we always encourage people to have when they get calls like this is, what is the person asking me to do right now? And how are they reaching out to me? And does that add up? You know, government agencies will never contact someone via instant message, for example. The IRS does not contact people directly by email. But often it's not the way that people initiate the contact that's the red flag. The red flag is in the details that follow in the conversation. The bottom line is that the government won't call, text, email, instant message, or anything and make threats if you don't pay or share personal information immediately. Only a scammer will do that. The federal government will never demand that you pay right away, and they won't and can't take payment by gift card or wire transfer or cryptocurrency. They'll never ask for credit card numbers over the phone. If someone calls and says they're from the government and asks for your credit card number, that's a red flag. Again, I'm sure that some of this is very familiar to you all, but we found that it's really helpful to reinforce and, you know, remind people of these things, because the more you hear about it, the more that part of your brain lights up when you get that call or that text message or that email. So Chris, I think we can go to the next slide, please. Here are some things that we like to encourage people to do. And again, you all may know this, but this is good information to pass along to the people you work with. Most importantly, hang up. If you get a call from someone saying that they are from the government and they're threatening you and telling you not to hang up and you need to pay immediately, don't listen to them. Hang up. Again, the government is not going to call anyone and insist that they pay supposed government debt by gift card immediately. But scammers are very good at preying on people's fears. And so, you know, the consequences of engaging with the scammer are always more serious than the consequences of hanging up immediately if someone is threatening you over the phone. Even if you think the message could be real, you know, hang up and don't call the number back. Don't trust the caller ID. Instead, take a moment. If you're really concerned that it's you know, a legitimate call, we encourage people to take a moment, spend some time on the internet, search for the person, if they gave the name, if they gave an agency a name, a particular bureau of the agency, whatever it might be. You know, do a little bit of research and take some time. Most importantly, never give your personal or financial information to someone who calls, texts, or emails and says they're with the government. Again, don't wire or use gift cards. And obviously never pay cash. Once you pay those ways, it's almost impossible to get your money back, and the scammer will take it and often, unfortunately, disappear. It's very important that we encourage you all, and you all encourage your colleagues and the people that you work with to report imposter scams like this at reportfraud.ftc.gov. Those consumer reports are what we were talking about at the beginning of the presentation when I said that we had received 1.4 million consumer complaints, and that's really helpful for us because we know from those complaints how the stories are changing, and we can kind of use our resources most effectively and get the word out about what common scams look like. Okay, Chris, I think we can go to the next slide, please. Who here has been a big winner, unfortunately? Unfortunately, like I said, I suspect several or many of you have gotten a call, an email, a pop-up window on your computer, a card saying that you won something. So we wanted to make sure that we covered what we're calling you've won scams, which are the second highest category of frauds involving older adults. So the way that a you won scam works, which again, many of you may already have unfortunately seen, is that someone will get in touch with you, usually by email, phone, or mail, and try to encourage you to be very excited, tell you that you won something or that you're entitled to something that you didn't know you were entitled to. The person will likely talk very fast and try to get you very excited and seem really happy for you and really friendly, and get you thinking about the cruise that you might be able to take, or the money you might be able to spend, or whatever you might, whatever they might be pitching to you. Whatever they're pitching, whatever they say that you won or you're entitled to, I'm sure it will be great. But the turn is always that, you need to take action right away in order to, in order to take advantage of this great opportunity. What do you all think? Does that sound familiar? I'm sure, unfortunately, like I said, it does. Tiffany, I noticed you popped up. Was there a question, or this is a sort of transition point. I was just going to ask Chris to move on to the next slide, please. So if there is a question, feel free. Oh, you're on mute, Tiffany, sorry.
We do have a question, and our question is, are most of these scams perpetrated from out of the US? Where do they originate?
Some are, many are. I don't have the statistics at the tip of my fingers right now about how many of them are, but that is very common, yes. A lot of times the call centers from which the scammers operate are not in the US, and that's a really important point, and I'm glad that someone raised the question, because it highlights the importance of ignoring your caller ID. A lot of times people will initiate these scam calls from outside the United States, but use sophisticated technology to mimic US numbers. Sometimes they will specifically identify themselves as numbers that you might recognize, but other times it might be random US numbers, but they often are calling from outside the US.
That's the only question we had right now. Feel free to answer or to put your questions in the Q&A box, and I will monitor that box and direct them to Chris and Matt.
Thanks so much, Tiffany, and thanks for the question. Okay, so more about you won scams. people get the call, they're very excited. And like I said, there's always going to be a turn. There's going to be a catch. Something, it is going to need to be done right away in order to achieve or obtain whatever great thing that the scammer is pitching. It could be a fee or taxes on the winnings or customs duties or some other, allegedly small amount in order to obtain this great prize. It's always or often, if not always, a technicality. If the person who's on the other end of the line asks questions, the scammer might say, "You're about to be rich," or "You're going to go on this fantastic trip. Why do you need to think about that now?" Does a few $100s matter to you if you're going to pay this fee and get your thousands of dollars of Canadian lottery winnings? No. But the reality, as unfortunately many people know, is that the prize isn't free, and often there isn't any prize at all. And the scammers will use several ways to try to get your personal information or your money directly. They often will try to get your personal information allegedly so that they can provide the prize to you. And unfortunately, that's where we see a lot of identity theft happen in these sorts of U1 scams. They might tell the person on the other end of the line that they need their bank account number so they can deposit the money. They might tell them to go get a prepaid gift card and send them the serial number and somehow convince them that they can get the money immediately through the gift card that way, or that they can transfer the fees and then that will allow them to get the money back somehow. They might ask directly for people to go wire them money, and then that they'll wire them back, or they'll get the prize or the trip or whatever it might be some other way. The important thing to remember in this scam and all of the imposter scams that we're talking about today is that almost always the key from the scammer's perspective is going to be to encourage people to act quickly. And that's part of the reason these U1 scams are so effective, is that they can convince people that this is a limited time offer. You have just won, but you need to act quickly to get your winnings. Otherwise you'll lose that opportunity. And people, try to get people caught up in the moment and go wire the money for the fee or whatever else it might be. Tiffany, did you have another question come in?
We have another question that came in, and this is in regards to bogus bills. You receive a call from a collection agency regarding a bill of which you have no knowledge. The amount is likely under $10,000. The calls can be very threatening. Can you elaborate on that, Matt?
I can't elaborate on any particular specific scam calls that people might have received, unfortunately, but it does sound like that scenario that you've just described sounds very similar to other scenarios that scammers have used. And in a couple of minutes, I'm going to hand the virtual microphone over to Chris. So she's going to have the opportunity to talk a little bit about how people can do their own research in terms of their own credit history and, investigate a little bit on their own if they're concerned that someone may have taken their, personal information. And, sort of the first thing that comes to mind in that instance is if someone is genuinely concerned, they can check their credit report and they can investigate that debt on their own. But from the way that you described it, it certainly sounds like a version of the imposter scam. And, if it is truly illegitimate, the response would be the same, which is, hang up and report it at reportfraud.ftc.gov.
Thank you, Matt.
Yep. Chris, did you have any other thoughts on that? or I guess you'll cover some of the stuff that I was discussing later, right?
Right, absolutely. Those free credit reports and such, absolutely.
Okay, great. Okay, so just to wrap up on U1 scams, you know, the sort of what to do if you or someone you know, unfortunately, ends up on the other end of the telephone or gets an email about some fantastic prize. Obviously, if it's a call, hang up. Other things that we like to encourage people to do in all of these situations, really, check with a trusted friend. Search online for the name of the sweepstakes company that, you know, is calling you to tell you that you won thousands of dollars or whatever a trip it might be. But going back to the first point, just talking it through with someone can often, you know, sort of crystallize best next steps for someone, and it takes people out of that moment of excitement that scammers are so good at encouraging people to dwell in, and gives the people on the other end of the often phone line a time to process and think about what the person is saying, and, you know, take the time that they need to keep their money to themselves and their information to themselves, and then think about what next steps might be best. You know, if you do, we always encourage people to just hang up first. So I'm always reluctant to get too sort of deep into the details of how to engage with the people who you're speaking with. But if you do happen to get details, like I said, about what organization these people are supposedly calling from, what their name is, what group they work with within that organization, you can use those details to do your own research later. But again, from my perspective, Matt, the best first reaction is just to hang up and not to engage, because unfortunately, scammers are very good at keeping the conversation going and generating excitement or fear. So hanging up is the best first step, but if you do get other details, you can use those to look into it later. And then again, at the end of the day, the most important message to get out there is that if people want, you know, payment quickly, don't do it. Just don't send your money quickly. Okay, so next very common scam, unfortunately, and the third highest category of fraud against older adults, and actually the costliest scam that we're seeing right now, and the numbers continue to climb every year, is romance scams. Millions of people have turned to online apps and social networking to meet people. Nothing wrong with that at all, but unfortunately, that has become very fertile territory for scammers. You know, and people can end up on social networking apps and just be looking for a friend, and end up finding a scammer. You know, the impact has been truly and unfortunately major with what we're calling romance scams. $547 million of reported losses to the FTC alone in 2021. These people create fake profiles and prey on people's emotions who are seeking friendship or love, and then make up a story about a medical emergency or unexpected travel, or make promises about gifts or other things and ask for money, you know, again, quickly. And unfortunately, like I said, people end up sending the money and then it's gone, and the scammer disappears. I do just want to also highlight one quick thing. We received complaints about consumers losing over $130 million in cryptocurrency in romance scams in 2021. So that might not be something that people often think about in terms of the ways that people experience losses in these types of scams, but it is very real, and a lot of money. So again, the answer is still the same. in these sorts of scams, if you haven't met anyone and you're not sure that they're someone that you can trust, and I recognize that often is a difficult thing for people to always be able to assess at the moment. Don't send money or gift cards, particularly not with any urgency. Research the person that you're speaking with online. Do reverse image searches on the internet. Check other websites about romance scams. People can search for the things that they're hearing from people on social networking sites or apps. And again, like going back to the point that I made earlier, talking to a family member or a friend is really, really important in these situations. And again, you can report. If you do unfortunately experience a romance scam, we encourage people to report them, because it's really important for us to understand where these scams are happening and what people are saying and doing. And that can happen at reportfraud.ftc.gov. Okay. Another scam that we wanted to highlight very briefly is tech support scams. Unfortunately, again, I'm sure many of you are familiar with them. You might get a pop-up, you might get an email, a text message saying you need important immediate work done on your computer, and they need your credit card number or your bank account number or more details, personal information, things like that, in order to fix it. Otherwise, you'll lose all your data. Again, this is another classic imposter scam. And Chris, I think the next slide, we have a video that we wanted to play. Is that right?
Yep, sure is.
Thanks very much.
My name is Don Holmes. I live in Sun City West, Arizona. In this community, we're all seniors. After you move in here, even if you don't know anybody, you get to know other people you enjoy doing things with. I use a computer predominantly for email and to get the news. One day, a thing pops up and kind of blocks the screen and says, you've got all kinds of viruses in your computer. The design of the pop-up had a Microsoft logo on the top, and they had a number. And I couldn't get rid of this thing on the screen. Turned the computer off, turned it back on, still there. So I called the number. They identified themselves as Microsoft. I had no feeling that there was anything wrong.
Tech support scams are real, and they're causing enormous consumer injury, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, and that's just based on the FTC's own law enforcement work. Just like Mr. Holmes, a lot of people are getting pop-ups on their screens, and often they claim to be associated with a company such as Microsoft or Apple, giving them lots of credibility.
They told me they would clear what they considered to be malware in there. In order to clear it up, they needed to get into my computer and have my control of the computer turned over to them. So I gave them my password. They went in, the thing came off of the screen. When I went back to my computer the next day, I couldn't access my files.
You'd never let a stranger into your house. Don't let one into your computer. If you get a pop-up, don't click on a link. If you get a phone call from someone who says your computer's security is at risk, don't listen to them. Stop, take the time to talk to a friend, talk to a family member.
When this happened to me, I was a little bit embarrassed. I mean, I consider myself fairly alert, but I was targeted and I was scammed. I didn't really want to talk about this, but I realized that if I didn't talk about it, that if I didn't file the complaint with the Attorney General, that if I didn't file a complaint with the FTC, that I would have shrunk into myself. And by talking about it, by talking to all my friends,
they're not amateurs, Don.
I began to realize that they also started talking, and they started indicating that they had experienced similar things. That kind of community, that kind of exposure, it's not an embarrassment. It's just something that happens when you're a senior. You have to talk about to other seniors. What I would suggest is contact the FTC. They have a website. You can fill out a complaint online. we can be empowered with your family, your friends, and other people within your community to try to put a stop or at least protect ourselves from these kinds of scams.
Thanks, Chris. So a couple of key takeaways from the video, which I think really nicely highlights an unfortunate aspect of these tech support scams, which is that they affect everyone. And again, we really, key takeaway number one, we want to really encourage people to talk when they experience these sorts of things, because what they often find out is that many other people have experienced them as well. And, it's absolutely understandable to be embarrassed, to feel embarrassment, but the more that we can encourage people and explain that these sorts of things happen all the time, unfortunately, to lots of different people, and get people talking about it, hopefully the less it will keep happening. So sharing what's happened to you, is just absolutely important, and we just really want to highlight that aspect of the video. The other aspect of the video is how sophisticated some of these scams can be, and that goes, sort of right along with the message that people shouldn't be embarrassed or ashamed if they experience identity theft or end up caught up in one of these tech support scams, because the scammers are really effective. And this next slide shows you, something like what I suspect the gentleman saw on his computer. And I know people close to me have seen on their computers, and I certainly have seen certain variants of them as well. So two key takeaways that we like to encourage people about to think about in terms of tech support scams generally. Real tech support companies won't contact you through a pop-up and won't ask you to call a phone number in a pop-up, and legitimate tech support companies won't randomly contact you by phone, email, or text message to tell you there's a problem with your particular computer. Tiffany, I noticed that you popped up. Does that mean that there's a question?
We have another question. Good question here. Do these scammers ever get prosecuted? How hard is it to catch them and charge them?
Yes, they do. It is unfortunately, well, first of all, let me back up. The FTC is a civil agency, so we do not have authority to prosecute anyone criminally. We don't, the FTC doesn't do criminal prosecution work. The Department of Justice does take care of that, and scammers do get prosecuted by the Department of Justice and do go to jail. And Chris, I don't know if you had any experience with those sorts of cases, but they do get prosecuted.
They do. Unfortunately, sometimes there's, layers and layers of fraud that trying to get to the bottom of where it came from. But yes, they do. Absolutely. We've done Nigerian prince scandals and things like that at DOJ while I was there. So they do. So the reports all help.
We don't have any other questions right now, but I'm sure some more will pop up. So keep putting those questions in the question box and we'll get those answered for you. And back to you, Matt.
All right. Thanks very much. And Chris, I think we can skip ahead because we covered, the next slide is avoiding tech support scams. And I think we kind of covered that already. And just for the sake of time, I think we can jump ahead to the next one, because I do want to very briefly touch on grandparent scams, because they are a very common type of scam that we see complaints about. Unfortunately, many of you may be familiar with these types of scams. Someone calls pretending to be a relative or a friend of a relative and might make up an excuse for why they sound different or don't know all of the details of the person they're talking to and needs money for a bail or rent or something else and needs it immediately. Again, urgency is always a red flag in all of these sorts of scams. We encourage people in these sorts of situations, even though it can be very emotional and a totally understandable reaction, it can often be to help someone who seems to be in need, to take a breath, resist the pressure to pay, Again, get off the phone as quickly as you can. Talk to someone you do trust about what just happened. Don't give any of your personal or financial information away on that call. Limit what you share publicly so that you hopefully limit the amount of these types of calls and scams that you get. Okay, so Chris, if you want to move on to the next slide, I will turn it over to you for the next 15 or 20 minutes.
Sure. Thanks so much, Matt, and hello, everyone. So Matt's kind of talked about all the different scams, unfortunately, that are out there. I'm going to talk a little bit about how to avoid identity theft, and certainly we hope you're never a victim of identity theft, but here are some things that maybe we can do to avoid those risks of identity theft. So offline, certainly you want to guard your social security number. Don't give that to anybody. Don't write it on a check. Keep that safe. I know Tiffany and I were joking a little bit before we all joined this call. I remember when I was in college, my social security number was my ID number. I mean, we would never do that today, but keep that safe. Keep that in a lockbox and protect it. Shred any financial documents, anything with your account numbers, again, your personal identification information, social security numbers. Make sure those are shredded. Don't just throw those in the trash. We know that people will dumpster dive and try to steal your identity that way. Don't share your personal information when someone asks. Again, kind of like Matt was saying, when people call and they want that information, we feel pressured to give that. The question maybe to ask them is, why do you need that? Why do you need my social security number? Why do you need my date of birth? Why do you need my bank account number? And just don't share that, and keep that information safe in your home. I mean, especially if you have guests in the home, if you have people working in your home, you don't want them to get that information. Also, check the mail as soon as you can. There have been reports of people stealing mail out of people's mailboxes. I'm sure we all get those credit card offers, things like that. So get your mail, monitor your accounts and financial statements. That kind of, we'll go into that in just a little bit, talking about the annual credit reports. So I'll give you some information on that, and that may answer the question that we had about people getting asked to pay bills and things. And also consider a credit freeze, and we'll talk about that in a moment as well. I see, Tiffany, do you have another question you want us to talk about?
There is another question that popped on in, but we can address it at the end of the program.
Okay. Let me go to this next one then. All right, and avoiding identity theft online. For starters, we always want to use strong passwords. You want to use like a combination of letters, numbers, upper and lowercase letters, symbols. Don't use your mother's maiden name. Don't use your social security number, kid's date of birth, things like that. Don't use the same password for different accounts. Really try to keep those strong and secure. Don't create a document called passwords and have all your passwords in that document either. Use multi-factor authentication if that's an option. A lot of the financial banking systems will have that. And what that means is that maybe you'll get a text message or an email in addition to when you log in with your username and password. And that just helps protect you. These next two kind of go along with the video that we saw about the text scam. You know, keep your antivirus software up to date. Maybe set it on auto updates so you never miss anything. Same goes for your operating system. You know, keep those up to date. If there's an update that's coming, just make sure that you run those as quickly as possible so that your operating system can help protect you against latest threats and viruses. I know Matt talked about this as well. Don't click on links in emails or text messages. If you want to look into what that might be, then maybe go to the site that you believe to be the correct site. If it's claiming to be from the government, go to one of those .gov sites and make sure that that's true. And before you pay for anything online, make sure that your connection is secure. They will have that little padlock. We've probably all seen that in the URL in the browser, that you know it's secure. And that means that the transaction is actually encrypted. But keep in mind, though, that if the site is encrypted, that doesn't necessarily mean it's on the up and up, because scamming kind of sketchy sites can use encrypt information too. So just be careful with what you do online.
Chris, we do have a question that came in.
Okay.
The question is in regards to those credit card offers that come in the mail, regarding shredding those. Should those be shredded when they come in the mail if you're not taking advantage of them?
In my personal opinion, I think yes. I would shred those. Matt may have some information on that as well. But I think that's always a good idea. I shred everything. I don't know if that's, working for DOJ for all those years, but yes.
Yeah, I think that that's right, Chris. I think the answer is, to the extent you're able to, we encourage people to destroy anything that either has your personal information on it or could be used to, steal your identity. Recognizing that different people have different abilities in terms of, access to a shredder. But if you're able to, it certainly can't hurt. That's again my view on it. Matt's view.
Yep, Matt and Chris, yes, we agree. I mean, and I suppose if you can't shred, maybe tear it up at least make it more difficult for them if they're going to try to get that.
Exactly.
Was that the only question you had, Tiffany?
That's all we have for now. Keep them coming.
Okay. So we'll move on. We'll talk about the annual credit reports that I know Matt touched on this as well. So the credit bureaus by law, so the three credit bureaus, we have Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion, and they have to give you a free credit report when you ask for it. Now, in the past, this was something that you could get once a year, but because of the pandemic, you can get a free credit report every week from all three of the credit bureaus until December of 2023. So next December, that's still in place. Every week, you can get a free credit report from all the credit bureaus. And this is important because you can look to make sure that your name, address, social security number are correct, but also checking for any accounts, looking at accounts maybe that you don't recognize. Are their balances, and this kind of goes back to the question we had before about the bill that they were getting from a supposed bill collector. Look at your credit report. Is there an account on there? Are there balances, things that you're not aware of, to make sure someone's not using your account, someone hasn't opened credit in your name. Also look to see if there's a high volume of inquiries from companies that you haven't contacted. So, you'll see those hard and soft, I guess, reports where they're looking at your credit. So, and if there are mistakes in there, then there are some things that you can do as you review those. You can contact them to fix the mistakes. You can get more information on that from ftc.gov/credit. If you think it's something further than just a mistake and you suspect identity theft, then certainly take action at IdentityTheft.gov. And we're going to talk about that here next. Let me move that slide. So we're going to talk a little bit about fraud alerts and credit freezes and what's the difference. And I was not familiar with what the difference was, so I found this very helpful. The last outreach that I took part in. But this is kind of a proactive way to protect against identity theft. And you can place a fraud alert or a credit freeze on your credit. And fraud alerts and credit freezes can be used to help you avoid identity theft, but they can also help you recover from it in the event that you are a victim. And here's how they work. So a fraud alert is going to tell businesses to check with you before opening a new account in your name. And usually that means that they're going to call you first and make sure that the person that's trying to open that account is really you. And I think this is really good, especially in this, online age that we're in. So that business would call you and say, are you really trying to buy this car? Are you really trying to open this account? Now, unlike a credit freeze, a fraud alert doesn't limit access to your credit report. So you can place this fraud alert by contacting any one of the 3 credit bureaus. And that credit bureau that you contact, so whether you contact TransUnion, Experian, Equifax, they have to contact the other 2. And this fraud alert is free. It's going to last for 1 year and you can renew it. So if you've experienced identity theft, then if you happen to be, I guess, a victim of identity theft, you can get an extended fraud alert, and that's going to last for 7 years. Tiffany, did you want to pipe in, or do you want me to keep going?
We do have a few things that have come in. The first was a comment that came in, actually 2 comments that came in. One is, I volunteer at a local police department contacting people who report minor crimes. The majority of the complaints involve scams, just like you are describing. It happens almost every day. Usually nothing can be done to locate the scammer, investigate, and prosecute. We always refer them to the FTC for info and reporting.
Thanks, Tiffany. That's a really, first of all, thank you to the person who made the comment for doing that important work. Sending people our way is really useful because, like I said earlier, getting people to report to us gives us the information we need to hopefully try to address the problem and to know what's happening, and how to best devote our resources to preventing it in the future. So first of all, thank you. Second, to the volunteer. Second of all, that's really unfortunate, but is consistent with sort of the reports that we described at the beginning. This is just a really serious, widespread problem that truly affects everyone.
Thank you. We have another participant here who shared an experience with us. I'm going to read it because I don't think everybody was able to see it. I once fell for the "you have a refund" scam. I gave the scammer temporary access to my checking account through a phone app, Google Pay, linked to my bank debit card. The scammer said he'd refund the money via, I only have $50 in that account. So in case the scammer tried to get the money, I thought he'd only get $50 at most. However, the checking account was linked to the savings account via overdraft protection. The scammer drained a large portion of my savings account before I realized what was happening. Somehow the scammer was able to avoid the usual $500 per day debit card withdrawal, all because of the overdraft protection connection between my accounts.
Yeah, again, that's a really unfortunate story, but also to highlight, really important to share, because that's just another way that scammers can get access to people's money. And I'm so glad that person shared the story, because the more that people hear those types of things, hopefully the less people will be inclined to act on the scammer's desire for them to act quickly. It's very, very useful to hear that story. I'm really sorry that person experienced that. And if they'd like, they can certainly report it at ftc.gov, reportfraud.ftc.gov, but it's really important to share. Chris, I saw that we have 5 minutes left. Do you want to run through the resources that people have quickly, just so that we make sure that we get the word out about those?
Absolutely. I was looking at that too. So, let me skip ahead. Whoops. There we go. Let me go. Real quick, if you are a victim of identity theft, you can go to the FTC's IdentityTheft.gov. It walks you through it. It's a great site. You see that exactly what you see there. It's Get Started. It'll take all of your information, create a report, and get you on the road to recovery, at least in the form of a plan. A little more on IdentityTheft.gov. Again, at the FTC's, this information is also on the FTC's website, I believe, right, Matt, to kind of share that with them.
Absolutely. If you go to IdentityTheft.gov, all of this information is available. It's really helpful.
Here's what a report would look like, an identity theft report. It gives you the option to create an account so you can continue to go in there and update the report with new information, or you also have the box to submit it without setting up an account, but you're not able to make any updates in the event that you needed to report anything on identity theft. Resources, as Matt was talking about. We all get robocalls, we all get robotexts. Those unwanted calls and texts are extremely annoying, but you can register all of your phone numbers at donotcall.gov. That's the national do not call registry. And we do a lot with those cases, robocall cases and unwanted spam texts and such. So please report those. You can forward your suspicious text messages to spam. We also encourage you to use any call blocking technology on your cell phones. A lot of the cell phone carriers have those. If you have that available on your landline, do something like that as well. You can also put your landline in the do not call .gov, not just your mobile numbers. Some of the resources that we have some brochures, the identity theft brochure and the child identity theft. And you can learn more about that again at ftc.gov /identity theft, or ID theft, I should say. You can order these.
Chris. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No.
I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, you're fine, please.
No, I think that I actually jumped in right as you were about to say that the great thing about FTC publications is they're all free and you can order in bulk. And so, recognizing that a lot of you work with a lot of people who deal with these issues and encounter them, poke around, make some orders. It's all free. The information is in the public domain too. So if you can take it and use it in your own work and in your own publications, you can find stuff that you may be able to use, presentations like this, things like that, all available there too. Sorry, Chris, go ahead.
No, you're fine. I appreciate it. And because I was going to say that too, you can get them in bulk, you can share them, you can put them on your own newsletters. There's no, we're fine with them sharing that. They can do all of that, right?
Absolutely.
And let's see, click this one. Spot scams, stay in touch, learn how to avoid it. Again, consumer.ftc.gov. You can sign up for these consumer alerts at ftc.gov, consumer alert, and kind of stay up to date on what the latest scams are, find out kind of what we're doing. And I think you get some weekly blog postings, or maybe they're not every week, but they come out, so you can share those as well. I think that's all we have here.
Yep, just report fraud again. Huh?
Yep, and I think Matt touched on this initially. If there is any fraud to report, fraud.ftc.gov. Tell us what happened, get the next steps, and kind of share that by helping stop the fraud.
Thank you, Chris and Matt. We have just one final question before we wrap up. We have somebody asking if the PowerPoint is available after the presentation.
I think that's something that we can do. We just we'll follow up with you, and then maybe it makes sense for us to handle it that way. Chris, I think there's one more slide, maybe, right? If you could please forward ahead. I just wanted to make sure that everyone knew that they can reach out to me directly, and I won't speak for Chris, but I do see that her information is on here. So, if you do have questions about any of these subjects, or you want more information, or you don't, you want more information about where to look for more information, really, we would, I personally would be happy to hear from participants today about things on their mind or other things that we can do to support people in this area. So, or other
Absolutely.
consumer protection areas. But yes, I'll follow up with you, Tiffany, on the slides, and hopefully you can then make them available to anyone who would want them.
Great. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for sharing your expertise with us. That about wraps up our 10 a.m. session.